Well, good afternoon. This is Bishop Elaine Glover, and I'm from the Cross Denominational Mission, which is associated with the Old Catholic Apostolic Church with Bishop Adrian. I've tried to use my Zoom, but it's not working properly, so I decided to really best to go on video. Well, I watched the video from Chris Wickland and Brett, and also a bishop, talking about abortion. And yes, abortion is seen as murder by God, and it's an abomination. But the problem is, you can't just say, well, actually, abortion is abomination. Why are people having abortions? Well, in my day, my mother didn't talk to me about sex, and I had no idea what an orgasm was. And one of my first sexual experiences was in a field at the back of my garden in Fielding Road. And the guy, I was only 15, I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't know what sex was. All I knew once was that when I was about 10, I was doing, I think it was games at school. It was the last part of the school year, and we did running and everything, and I wore white shorts, and all of a sudden it was saturated in blood, and I thought I was going to die. Apart from the embarrassment, I thought I was going to die. So, I'm going to go and see my mother, I'm going to die. Then she told me about periods, but until that time I didn't know what they were. I had no idea. I have done, when you're growing up in school, they do things with chickens, how chickens hatch and how the egg's made and various other things. But I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything. And this boys are saying we didn't really have sex. Keep on the same subject, Elaine. Well, I had no idea what an orgasm was. I really had no idea. So then another time, me and the friends went off, and we stopped out overnight in a tent, and I slept next to a boy. My period didn't come on time, and I thought I was pregnant, and my mum had to rush off in a taxi to go and get a pregnancy test. Well, obviously I wasn't pregnant. But my day, in the 60s, 70s, we never really had what you'd call proper sex education, where you could talk about sex and orgasms and sperm and all those kind of things. I hadn't got a clue. And my mother wasn't very free to talk about those things. However, when my daughter was growing up, it was a complete opposite. When they were at school, they had sex classes or sex lessons. And one day, she came home with some paper that they had, talking about condoms. Which flavour condoms would you like to have? In other words, they were talking about oral sex. Well, at this time I knew about oral sex and orgasms and all sorts of things, but it wasn't something I went overboard about or anything like that, because I didn't come from a generation of I didn't come from a generation of people that were very, open about sex. Your parents were, for a start off. And all my grandma would say, it didn't happen in my day, oh no. Later on, when my grandma died, I discovered that my grandfather wasn't the father of Auntie Eileen. Nana had Auntie Eileen before she got married to Grandad. And the problem is with things like abortion is that it's all right going on about, it's terrible, it's murder and all this. The thing is, what I did in Kenya as a missionary was that girls were having babies, they were pregnant with the babies, and once they had the baby, if they didn't die first, because some of them were 8 years old. If they had a baby, that was it. They wouldn't go back to school again. They would end up as a maid for the child's father's mum, who could have been an orphan, or they had abortions. And in Kenya, they didn't use tablets, my goodness. They used concentrated washing powder, concentrated tea, in water, and also they drank, did I say orange? Everything was concentrated, and apparently it rotted the fetus. But all they thought the unborn child was a blob of blood. They hadn't got a clue what the unborn child looked like at different stages. And so they would, abort these babies, and they would have abortions every time they got pregnant, and some of them got pregnant many times. So you can't stand with a child and young girls and say, look, you're a bad girl. In the Bible it says that it's an abomination and you're killing life and you've murdered that baby. You can't do that, because they don't really understand. It's not something they would ever think about. So when I was a missionary in Kenya, what did I do? We had girl-child education, and I used to go into the classroom and say, God loves girls. Girls are special. Girls rule okay. And then with the boys, we said, boys rule okay, blah, blah, blah. So built up some trust with them, and then we began to have talks and conferences about girl-child education. And what really helped young people understand about abortion was the Society Protecting the Unborn Child fetus box. Now, I remember years ago when I was doing an evangelism with my late husband, Nigel, and this was in about 2007 or 8, that a friend of mine, she'd got one of these boxes, but she'd only got one left, and was standing there with this baby on a table with Bibles and things, and people looked absolutely shocked at this baby on a table. But when the boxes of they're fetuses, but they're not real ones, they're just very realistic. And when you have those in a school and you pass them round to the girls and boys, because they're both responsible for making a child and things like that, they began to understand what they're actually aborting. And it was unbelievable, even for me, to see what a fetus looked like at 3 months and then 4 months, and how it was developing, and how they were just like small unborn children. They weren't blobs of blood. And, we began to say about what the fetus would be going through. This was developing, that was developing, and we began to talk to them. And, and I was saying to them, really, you need to wait to have sex until you're married, because if you get pregnant, especially girls, girls obviously get pregnant, especially, the boy provides the sperm, and obviously the mother has the baby inside of it. Well, for boys, they've just given the sperm and created a baby, but the girl has to carry the baby. And your life could be easily finished because, you have a baby, you're away from school, you miss out, then you end up in lower classes, then you may be pregnant again and the child needs looking after, and you can't look after a child and go to school. And I was trying to explain, and I was also I didn't know, even up till I met Adrian, I wasn't really aware, because I always thought that sex before marriage was a very old-fashioned idea, and it didn't matter anymore, but it does. Because marriage is a 3-chord strand. You have God, you have the husband and the wife, and God is in the middle of the relationship. And I know if I'm not on good terms with God, then I'm not on good terms with Adrian either. And when we've had these really terrible rows, big rows, because we both struggle with stress, I just say to the Lord, can you help me? I don't like Adrian. It's getting on my nerves, but can you give me a love for him and he me? And the next day, the relationship is actually so much better. But I wish I knew properly and understood fully that we shouldn't have sex before marriage, because sex is for marriage. Sex is to provide your child between the husband and the wife and for the future generations. And the thing is, what I also learned, I'm trying to sort of compact it because I'm on my phone, my Zoom doesn't work at the moment. But what's so impacting is, that people need to share with younger people or young marriages, because when I got married and I was going through distress and problems with my first husband, you go to the church because that's what you're told to do. You go to the church, but they don't want to know. They don't want to come round and counsel you. So the personality I am, I wrote to Ian Paisley and said, we need more sex education in the church. And he sent the Right Reverend Cranston round. I can't remember now what he said. It was a long time ago because I'm 64 now. And this was when I was before I was 20. And in the end, I got divorced. But I didn't know what it was to be a mother. I didn't know what it was to be a wife. I didn't know a lot about sex. And I didn't know a lot about marriage. I was really struggling. So I needed some help and support. And I know now that they do have the marriage course. I mean, I did that when I used to volunteer in prisons in about 2006. And I went with my late husband, Nigel. But this is the problem, when you have sex, it's supposed to be joyous between a man and a wife. But the problem is when you have sex with somebody that you don't know, first of all, you pass on soul wounds and soul ties, which can affect you very badly. You can get very, very hurt, and your heart can be broken, and you can get soul wounds, soul ties, and a lot of them, the bad ones, are to do with sin. You're committing sin, but you see, the problem is, again, I went to church, but nobody taught me anything about marriage, sex, what it's about, why you shouldn't have sex before marriage. And I always thought, they were just old-fashioned, didn't want you to have anything that was... I didn't understand what sex was about, why it was for, and how these relationships can... I was just trying to see if I could have my scissors, but I can't really see them. I done a teaching where you have a heart, so you have sex with one person, doesn't work out, and a part of your heart is stolen or broken because you're no longer in a relationship with that person. So then you have another boyfriend or a girlfriend, regardless of what, whether a man or a woman. And you've got this soul wound, so you have sex with them and it doesn't work out. So that's another soul wound and another soul tie. And if you've had sex with a lot of people, or you're a prostitute, or you've got many, many soul ties and soul wounds, which is why you get depression, why you get all these different illnesses, because a lot of what you're doing is sin. God didn't want you to have all these different relationships. And when you have a relationship with some of them, your spirit and soul become one. So you have some of their traits and they have some of yours. And this is what happens. And this is why so many people are broken and lost. And a lot of people like me, I felt unloved, I felt rejected, I felt uncared for. And so you have sex to try and fill a void where Jesus should be. And this is the problem. And when I've actually had different radio interviews with people from Spuck, And it's shocking to think that, you know, you have this unborn child inside you, and you're inside of your tummy, and the umbilical cord and the fluid or amniotic fluid is looking after the baby. And what happens when you actually have an abortion is that the baby is either sucked away, and it sucks off the arms, sucks off the leg, and sucks off the head. And they're given this powerful injection, and sometimes the baby is on the floor, still alive, or left in a bucket, where they put the waste, what they call the waste abortion, in a bucket. But the parents of the baby, the girl or the woman, however old they are, they don't know what's happening. They don't know that the baby's been sucked off of a suction thing, or chopped off, or the head's been chopped off, or it's horrific, it's torture. And imagine how those babies or the unborn children would feel. They'd be in great pain, because pain in your body starts at a very early age. Your heart develops at a very early age. And so they tell them all this nonsense. Oh, well, you know, you've had sexual transmitted disease, so you can't have a baby. That's a load of nonsense. And all these excuses to have abortions, you're not old enough, you're this, you're that, but they don't realise how it affects the woman or the child who's aborted the child, the guilt they feel, the loss, the grief. I mean, it's bad enough when you have a stillborn, but never mind, you've actually allowed your baby to have been murdered. And so they begin to have mental health problems, and that affects them greatly until they repent to God. And you know, God is the God of judgment, but the Lord knows that these young people are not being told what's going on. They're given 5 minutes to say yes or no before they have the abortion. And it's wicked, really, but abortion's been going on for years, and apparently the fallen angels before the flood used to teach humans about abortions and various things like that. And I remember once my daughter came to where I was working, and she told me she's had 2 abortions. And I wept because, you know, why couldn't she come to us? I suppose she'd be a bit worried. But I don't know whether I'd been able to go with her, but I'd have tried to stop her having an abortion and been a bit more supportive. But many of these young girls are terrified, absolutely terrified of what their fathers are going to say, what the mums are going to do and say. And the sad part is people assume that the fathers of these babies know what's going on, but they don't. And a lot of these young men don't want the girlfriend or the girl that they're going out with to have an abortion. And they suffer as well. And so what do we do? And I clearly believe that in schools they should be taught exactly what abortion is about, what happens to the women and the effects of the abortion, and also what happens to the effects of a man, because the thing is, men really do suffer and struggle too. Anyway, I'm going to now turn this off and do part 2 in a moment.